Hannah Murray on TRE in the afternoon.
Joining us on the line now is Wendy Holden. She's written dozens of novels, memoirs and biographies, many of them bestsellers. She co-wrote Goldie Hawn's memoir, Barbra Streisand's memoir and Patricia Gucci's memoir, among many others. Her latest, Intimate Audrey, is the authorised biography of Audrey Hepburn, co-written with her eldest son, Sean Hepburn Ferrer. Featuring excerpts from her personal letters, Sean candidly recounts how the shy girl from across the landing became the star we remember and love today. Welcome to the show, Wendy.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for having me back.
Oh, it's lovely to chat with you again. And this must have been such a wonderful project to take on.
It really was. As your listeners may know, I specialise in writing about the Holocaust and World War II. So what a delight to hive off into Audrey Hepburn's life, because everybody I spoke to, all the research I did, just adorable. Everybody loved her. Nobody had a bad word to say about her. She was all that you would hope she would be, and a whole lot more.
Yeah, and must have been amazing spending time with her eldest son, Sean, and obviously getting insights, because as we all know or assume, people in the public eye, we don't know really much about them, what they're like behind closed doors. The public perception is often very, very different to what they're really like at home.
Yes, absolutely. And Sean's lovely. He is the son of an actor called Mel Ferrer, and Sean lives in Madrid, actually, and in Italy. He has two homes, and I work with him in Madrid. He is a wonderful son. He had a very, very close relationship with her. It really was, he was her best friend. And although there have been over 1,000 books written about Audrey, there's even one, I think, called Audrey's Neck, would you believe? But, you know, every aspect of her. But this was the first ever authorised biography, the biography that he, as the eldest son, has authorised, and he asked me to come on board and help him write, because he wanted her to be revealed as human. You know, she's on a pedestal, and he wanted people to know that she was human, she was flawed, but she was also wonderful. And despite the terrible things that happened to her in her life, and there were many of those, she pushed on through to become this incredible, enduring icon. In a way, you can't believe that she died in 1993, and yet you still see her photograph everywhere. In fact, the family play a game called Where's Granny, which every single day they try and spot a picture of her. And of course, now I'm playing it, and you all probably will too, because it really is extraordinary. She's on, you know, mugs and bags and in hair salons and on newspaper advertising. Yeah. And she's just so incredibly relevant still.
And let's talk about some of the tragedies, because there were so many. Her parents got divorced when she was young, and she was determined pretty much throughout her life to create this perfect family, which never really kind of happened, did it?
It didn't. Her father walked out when she was 6 years old. It was devastating for her. I think for any daughter and father relationship, that can be so cruel. And it definitely shaped her. It definitely damaged her in life. Sean would be the first to admit that. And I think it damaged her choices of men later in life. She didn't choose terribly well until much, much later on, when she was with her last partner, who was perfectly suited for her. But yes, it was a sad thing, because she did want lots of children. She wanted to have a big, happy family, all the things that she hadn't had, because her mother was also quite distant. She was a Dutch baroness, not a warm mother at all, critical of her quite a bit. And so it was difficult for her to figure out what it was that she was going to do for herself. And she made some bad choices. But, you know, as I said right from the start, she pushed on through, and she was a wonderful mother, and she was a wonderful friend, and she did the best she could with what she had.
Yeah. How many times did she marry?
She married twice, and then for her last relationship, which was 15 years and the longest actually, she didn't marry him, but they were together throughout. And he was somebody who escorted her and shepherded her through all her incredible humanitarian work for UNICEF.
Yeah, well, I'll come on to that. I want to hear lots about that. But obviously her career and fashion icon, you know, a lot of people will remember that iconic image with her hair up and the black dress and the pearls. And, you know, I remember going to a fancy dress party a few years ago, and you had to dress up as some kind of, not necessarily Hollywood icon, but something to do with the entertainment industry. You know, we had the Flintstones and all sorts, and there were 8 Audrey Hepburns.
Well, it's a relatively easy one to copy, isn't it? And of course, she would be absolutely astonished that she was going to be any sort of fashion icon, because she started off incredibly poor, and her unique style, which actually started off as sort of black slacks and a black t-shirt and black flat pumps, was all she could afford. She basically had one pair of trousers, two tops, and a skirt, I think she said. And so when she came out, first as a ballet dancer, that's what she always wanted to be, and then ultimately got into acting because ballet didn't work for her, sadly. She was so different from all the Hollywood starlets who were all voluptuous and blonde and low-cut dresses, and she didn't have anything to be low-cut about, really. Yeah. And so she was so different and so chic and European and wonderfully different after the war that women latched onto her, and it sort of took off from there.
Yeah. And obviously Breakfast at Tiffany's, iconic film, so many people's favourite movie, men and women.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, my personal favourite is Sabrina. I had the joy of watching every single one of her movies, although the book doesn't really feature her movies very much at all. It's not about that. It's because her acting career was almost incidental to who she was. It was a wonderful career, and she flew high and got an Oscar for her first movie, Roman Holiday, which is another favourite of mine. And then it took off from there. But it was always something that was just going to happen for a brief period of time before she could start her family, and that was really all she was obsessed about. But of course, lovely to watch them. Yes, Tiffany's has a lovely, it's an unusual, quirky film, and actually a difficult film, because essentially she's playing a hooker. She's playing a courtesan, a woman who, although fiercely independent, is in a sort of rather difficult situation in New York during that period. And to begin with, she didn't want to play it. She didn't think that was right. But then she was able to put her own spin on it. And of course, Holly Golightly ended up being such an adorable character that everybody loved her.
Yeah.
But if you watch Sabrina, I think she was at her peak. She played opposite William Holden and Humphrey Bogart, and it's lesser known, but the dresses and the look of her and the whole story is absolutely charming.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And it's funny how some of these films, if they were made today, would be quite different. Some of them have, stood the test of time, yes, but also dated. Looking at Breakfast at Tiffany's, I can think of the actor playing the Chinese character, and that would never happen today, would it? You wouldn't get an English person doing a Chinese accent like that at all.
They really were of their time, but she didn't love Breakfast at Tiffany's. It was not her favourite film. In fact, Sean's favourite film of hers is Funny Face, because his mother was so joyful, dancing with Fred Astaire. But actually, the one that Audrey felt most dear to, I think, apart from Roman Holiday, which sort of got her stardom, and she had a lifelong dear friendship with her co-star Gregory Peck. But the one that really she felt most powerfully about was The Nun Story, because it was about a nun in the Belgian Congo who was struggling with her faith, and when her father was killed in World War II, she went back to Belgium. She gave up the nun's habit and went back to Belgium to help in hospitals and things there, and work for the resistance. And of course, that had incredible parallels with Audrey's own life, who had lived through the hunger winter in Holland from the age of 12 right through till 16. Almost starved to death, incredibly malnourished, very fearful, in a very difficult position under Nazi occupation, and, saw people being executed and terrible things happening all around her. And she managed to sort of put a lot of that experience, I think, into The Nun Story.
Yeah, she was a very versatile actress.
She really was, and she was very much drawn to people who'd also experienced war. So her favourite, directors were refugees from Europe. Jimmy Stewart was one of her favourite friends, her best, dearest friends, and he had served in the war very well. He had all sorts of medals as a pilot and a airman for the American U.S. Air Force, and so she surrounded herself with people who knew what it was like to live under occupation and live with nothing and emerge with nothing. And that meant a lot to her. She was not interested in the frippery of Hollywood. She lived in Switzerland, a long way from Hollywood, and she rejected all of that. Much to Sean's infuriation, he wanted her to buy a flashy Mercedes, and she wouldn't have it, had a Volvo estate, and her response was, but where would we put the dogs?
Wow, amazing, because we wouldn't sort of think of her like that, thinking of her as this Hollywood icon, but yet she was obviously so down to earth and not like that at all.
Oh, and she cooked, and she was passionate about gardening, absolutely passionate. She had been in Kent just prior to the war for a number of years. Her mother basically dumped her there when the marriage broke up, and she went to school there and lived with a family that she came to adore. And they taught her how to grow vegetables, dig for victory and all of that during, preparations for war. And she fell in love with roses, English roses, and she always longed for her own garden. And it was one of the first things she did when she got some money. She bought this beautiful farmhouse in Switzerland, and she had a beautiful garden developed filled with roses, and she created this beautiful vegetable garden, and she painted. She was a very talented artist. She didn't develop it very much, but one of my favorite paintings of hers is actually of the vegetable garden.
Oh, nice. And in the book, you feature unseen photos, which is lovely, and also some letters. Are they letters that she wrote or people wrote to her?
Yes, letters that she wrote back to her husband, Mel, in particular, when she was in the Congo filming The Nun Story, which was, it's a tricky place to be. And in fact, after the crew left, not that long after, only a few months, there was a massacre exactly where they were, because there was a rebellion and there was a lot of civil strife there. And so she was very lucky to have got out of there alive, but she just loved it. And they actually went to a leper colony, and they were told that they're to be careful, and they were meant to wear gloves. And she forgave all that. She just pushed that to one side and just couldn't wait to be with the children. Oh. Children were her passion. She wanted them. She couldn't have them. She had several miscarriages, and she only ended up having 2 sons by 2 separate husbands. And then when they were grown up, she dedicated the final years of her life to the children of the world who were caught up in war and famine and strife.
Amazing. And did her 2 sons become close?
Well, they didn't really, because they had rather separate lives. By the time Sean was off and away to finishing school in Switzerland, his brother Luca was back in Rome with his father, and then that marriage broke up. So Luca stayed a lot more in Rome and saw his father much more there. And Sean was already by then, probably in America by then and traveling, and he was in film production. He went to Korea. He went to all sorts of different places. So I don't think they ever really were terribly close, not even when they were younger, because there was quite an age difference.
Right. And let's talk about her UNICEF work, and how and when did she get into that?
She was invited to go to China, I think, to Macau, to speak for a fundraiser. Somebody asked her to go and speak at a fundraising event, and she said yes, even though the thing that terrified her most of all was public speaking, which I find extraordinary for somebody who is an actress, but to stand up in front of a group of people really had her in knots. And she would shake, she would tremble. She smoked. That was one of her only vices. She smoked cigarettes, and she would smoke and be very, very nervous about it. And then she would stand up and just give an Oscar-winning performance, of course. And because they saw how much of a draw she was, how many more people came than they expected because it was Audrey, they then asked her if she would be a goodwill ambassador. And, previous people had been celebrities, including Danny Kaye, very famously, but none of them really went to the front line the way she volunteered. She decided very early on that if she was going to do this, as Sean would say, once she did something, she did it to the best of her ability. And she was going to do it so well, which meant that she was going to go to the places that were too dangerous for anybody to go to, the places that were neglected by the media because of that. And she went to Ethiopia, she went to war-torn Somalia when there was no consular help. The warlords, were killing each other and starving people and destroying wells. It was the most terribly dangerous thing to have done. And I speak as a former war correspondent. I am in awe of some of the places that she went to. But she was determined to go there, even though it broke her heart, even though she had so much empathy as an actress and as a human being that it really, really affected her terribly. the things that she saw, their children dying literally in her arms. But she was determined to go. And then when she came back, even though she was emotionally and physically wrung out, she would go immediately to speak to as many people as she could about what she had seen. And I think the estimate is that in the years that she was there, which was only 5 or 6 before she very sadly died far too young, she raised something like $6 million.
Wow.
And that we're talking about the late 1980s and early 90s, an extraordinary achievement.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. And it was obviously something that she was so passionate about. It wasn't people pushing her to do it. She was pushing everyone else to do it. It was all her.
I mean, Sean was worried about her because she was getting so thin and she was so tired and she was so upset by all the things she'd seen. Her partner, Rob Volders, was very anxious about her. Even the people at UNICEF were saying, listen, you don't have to do this. And no, I'm going, I'll go, this will be it. And then I won't do another one for a while. And of course, the next one would come along and I must go there. She went to Vietnam. She went to all extraordinary places and did a lot of stuff behind the scenes that people didn't know, which we reveal in the book as well, about saving Sean's childhood friend from Vietnam and 8 members of his family and getting them out of Vietnam. And it was never known and never written about until now. I mean, she was just an all-around good person, you know, and I just kind of think, what would Audrey do? You know, every aspect of my life now, I think, well, what would Audrey do? And what Audrey is actually something my father always used to say, which was just be kind, be thoughtful, be compassionate, think of other people. And my goodness me, the world needs that now.
Oh, absolutely. Isn't it incredible? We're talking about 2 totally separate, I mean, you can't call the ambassador stuff a career necessarily, but 2 totally different parts of her life, both with amazing success and passion. And it's really incredible. A lot of people might not even have one aspect of their life that's really successful and incredible, but to have 2 like that. I mean, I wonder how she felt at the end of her life, what she was, I assume she'd be most proud of the latter years, I guess.
She always said it was her most meaningful career. You know, it was something that was the most meaningful to her, and she was very glad she did it. But it did take its toll on her. And we take the reader right to the end of her life, which I have to say I was crying, sobbing as I was writing it. Aww. And sobbing I was talking to Sean about it because it was obviously so tragic. She was 63. And she died of a rare colon cancer, and she should have been, you know, around for so much longer. But even at the end, she did it beautifully. Of course she did, you know. It was exactly as one would hope to go, you know, at home with loved ones in her beautiful house, you know, and with a smile on her face ultimately. But her last words were about the children that she couldn't save. When she was at UNICEF, those were her last thoughts and her last words. And she told Sean that she could see them around her and that they were okay.
Wow. Isn't that beautiful? Heartbreakingly beautiful.
I know.
What a woman.
It's heartbreakingly beautiful. And she's just buried in the little village churchyard there. Very simple little wooden cross and blossom tree over her. And, you know, that's how she wanted to be. She didn't want to be anywhere near Hollywood or America or anything. That was not her. She died as she lived.
Amazing. Couldn't the stars of today learn an awful lot from her?
Yeah. Well, Sean did say in an interview recently that his mother would be absolutely appalled by the state of the world now and what is happening to the world's children in war zones from, you know, Ukraine to Gaza to everywhere else. And
yeah.
She would be absolutely racked by it. And in a way, he's kind of glad that she isn't around to see that, you know. So, yeah.
I wonder how she would have coped with social media.
Yes.
Whether exactly. She would even have been on it or not.
Oh, I'm sure she would never have been on it, ever. It would not have been her thing at all. She had to endure the paparazzi, particularly when she was living in Rome, married to her second husband, Andrea. I mean, there was just no privacy at all. She ended up having to take her son Luca to somebody's private garden because if they went anywhere public, they were just swarming all over her. So she was always very gracious. She always stopped and she posed. She never, you know, complained, but it was a hard thing for somebody who just wanted to be a mum.
Yeah. And does Sean have any stories about any of that? I mean, how old was he while she was in these big films?
Oh, when she was in films, he was young and then a teenager, and he actually had his own. She never talked about her work, and she certainly never, encouraged anybody to deal with it. I think the Oscar sort of sat somewhere as a bookmark or something on a bookshelf. It was not sort of publicly on display. And he just became curious and interested, and he set up his own Audrey Hepburn Film Festival in the attic. He slung a sheet over a piece of rope and got the old cine projector out and just watched them. And every now and again, she'd pop her head up through the door just to make sure he was all right. And if he told her that he really liked her in one particular film, she immediately credited everybody else but her. Oh no, it was the cinematographer. Oh no, I had a marvelous director. She never said, oh yes, I thought I did rather well in that. Well, that just wasn't who she was. She didn't ever suggest that anything she had done was. I mean, she was just astonished by the adulation that she had. She said, "All I did was go to work, be on time, and try to be nice to people." And that, as far as she was concerned, that was her life. That's who she was. She didn't. There was no ego at all, and no self-aggrandizement at all.
Yeah, fascinating. So it really was just a job that she did. She didn't want any of the other stuff that came with it.
Oh, she was very grateful for the money because it allowed her to buy her dream house and create her dream garden and raise her, Sean in particular, much more than Luca, because by then they were back in Rome for the new husband. But Sean, grew up in this idyllic place, absolutely idyllic. The mountains in the background and the lake in the foreground, an orchard, almond blossoms, apples picked and stored in the cellar. I mean, pickling that she did and the cooking that she did. All sorts of lovely things. And people were worried that, people who didn't know her used to say did she have an eating disorder? She was always so thin, but she had been half starved as a teenager. And that was a very difficult thing to recover from when your bones are growing. And she was also genetically, the family weren't overweight ever, but she loved her food. She loved her pasta pomodoro. She had a passion for chocolate. That was the second vice she had, was chocolate. But she would just have a square of dark chocolate every night with a small whiskey and a cigarette, and that was it. So everything in moderation, but really enjoyed that. And she made a fantastic chocolate gatto, apparently. And I've taken some of her recipes. I've been playing with them. Penne al vodka. So
how lovely.
Two of my favorite, pasta and vodka. Why not?
I'm sure it works perfectly well.
Yes, exactly.
And how lovely, Wendy, that Sean came to you. He wanted to write a book and he approached you. Well, that's so wonderful.
Yes, because he wanted somebody who knew about war, who would be able to describe those scenes and bring them to life. And if anybody reading the book, you might be surprised to know that the beginning of each chapter starts as a section of screenplay. So it immediately puts the reader in that scene, and then that scene sets the tone for the book. So, for example, she was, after the war, she was living in Amsterdam with her mother in a boarding house, and the editor at a publishing house, who had been given the task of reading a copy of Anne Frank's diary with a view to maybe publishing it, asked Audrey's mother if Audrey would read it, because they were exactly the same age, she and Anne. They had both been pretty much in hiding throughout the war. Obviously, Anne in an attic hidden away, and Audrey and her family hiding in the basement in Arnhem, where they were being bombed to billio by the Allies. And she wanted her to read it to see if it was true to her own experience. And it traumatized Audrey to the point that she could never play Anne Frank, even though she was asked to. And she was really traumatized by that. And she decided, was one of her many tenets in life, was to live her life in memory of Anne Frank and do the things that Anne Frank never got a chance to do. So, yes, it was, all those sort of stories were so important that I knew about the Holocaust, that I understood about Anne Frank, that I knew I'd been to refugee camps and I knew the horrors, and I'd seen children dying and I'd seen the horror of all of that. And Sean wanted somebody to bring that to life in a way that was different to all the other books about her. And that's why we start each chapter with a screenplay.
Oh, wonderful. Sounds like the perfect collaboration.
It really was. I would love to do another book with him, but I think there's nothing left to say. But, who knows? Who knows?
Yes. Oh, fantastic. Well, if people want to get a copy of Intimate Audrey, the authorised biography, it's by Sean Hepburn Ferrer and Wendy Holden, who we've been chatting with today. Wendy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.